Hi, I'm Nick, and welcome to Storytime. Today we'll be covering the middle 6 issues of the initial run of Green Lantern Green Arrow, featuring both the classic Speedy drug addiction story and the first appearance of Green Lantern John Stewart, and ending with the life-changing Green Arrow story guest written by Elliot S. Maggin, What Can One Man Do? One final part will follow this one. Let's begin. Green Arrow drops by Black Canary's place with a box of roses. Dinah opens the box, and two harpies fly out. How do you fight a nightmare? Ollie tries a tear gas arrows, but the harpies blow it back at him with their wings. They stumble outside, only to find the harpies have disappeared. Ollie says that mythology is way out of his line, but they both know who to call. Oliver sends Hal Jordan a telegram, because in 1976 it's a more sure way to get the message to someone than a series of phone calls. Hal recites his oath, though he's not sure of his official status in the Corps after his long leave of absence. While flying over Star City, he runs across the Harpies. Hal follows them to a woman who calls herself the Witch Queen, and brandishes a wand at him. Its jewel glows like yellow light before sucking Green Lantern into another world, the dimension of the Furies. Trapped within the gem, Hal confronts an old enemy. Meanwhile, Oliver has found a gem inside the box of roses, and he and Dinah plan to visit the shop he got them from. Outside, Oliver gets his clock cleaned by a group of large Amazonian women. Black Canary doesn't know what's going on yet, but she'll defend Ollie regardless. Using her judo and jujitsu, she takes on and defeats each of the larger women, earning their respect, and an explanation. The Harpies and the Amazons lived and trained together, but one day a wizard sought the hand of their queen. She spurned him, and he vowed revenge. He trapped the Amazons and Harpies both in the gem dimension. Then later, the Witch Queen came and gave them the small gems which allowed them to project themselves to Earth for a short time. The Amazons plan to make all men pay for the crime of the wizard. Ollie wakes up. He says that if all this is true, they need to find the Witch Queen, and the Amazons agree to lead them to her. The Witch Queen turns out to be the sister of Sinestro, Green Lantern's greatest foe. He set all this up just to trap Hal. Green Arrow smashes through their window. Sinestro's about to put on his own power ring as Ollie takes aim. The arrow plucks the ring out of Sinestro's hand and pins it to the wall. Oliver uppercuts him to the floor, and Black Canary flips the Witch Queen over. Only one man at a time may enter the gem world, so Black Canary goes in with the Amazons to try and free Hal. Hal is lost in a limbo of churning forms where his ring won't work. He's picked up and carried by Harpies who bring him to Medusa. Dinah arrives and tells Medusa that she's been used by another man, and the Amazons back her up. Medusa refuses to kill one man for another, and releases him. Hal and Dinah return to reality to find Oliver had Sinestro collected by the police. Ollie says he doesn't believe in Medusa or other dimensions, and Hal says if he'd been there, he'd believe. Oh, how he'd believe. Last month, an old man named Grandy and a young girl named Sybil with mental powers assaulted Carol Ferris on the street, beginning our tale, and a child shall destroy them. Now, Hal and Ollie accompany Dinah to her new job at a school. Outside, they are attacked by birds. Green Arrow fires a subsonic noise arrow, scaring them away. They dislodge a branch, though, and Green Lantern catches it. Hal then gathers the birds up in a green ball and sends them miles away. They travel on to the school, and the school owner, Jason Belmore, expresses an instant dislike for the heroes, and demands they leave at once. They resolve to look deeper, and find a car nearby. Hal lands and finds it is Carol Ferris, now in a wheelchair from her attack by Sybil. She's worried about Jason Belmore, also her fiancé, who's been acting strangely since taking over the school, living in constant terror. All of a sudden, the car begins to shake, and then falls apart and goes over a cliff. Luckily, Green Lantern is there. Hal makes a large Pegasus and saves Carol's wheelchair, too. Once landed, he recharges his ring, preparing for trouble, and they head for the school. It begins to rain, and the three shelter in a small cabin. Hal tells Carol how his adventures have changed him. No longer young and cocky, now he's older, wiser, and a lot less happy. At the school, Dinah had sensed something was wrong and began poking around as Black Canary. Grandy found her and commanded Jason to attack. She threw him into a wall and dodged Grandy's punch. He orders Sybil to make her sorry. Sybil blinds Canary with pain and she falls unconscious. Grandy removes her wig, and he and the children drag her to a basement. He stirs up a nest of hornets and locks her inside. All Dinah can do is protect her face with her wig and hope for rescue. Lantern and Arrow arrive and ask Jason Belmore where Dinah is. He leads them towards the cellar. Passing the dining hall, though, they are discovered and Grandy makes the children attack them. Green Lantern blocks the dinnerware with a shield, but Sybil's mental powers reach past it and incapacitate the heroes. The zombie-like children close in. Black Canary cries out in pain and Oliver hears it. He struggles to his knees and looses a vortex arrow, creating lights and sounds that disorient his opponents. The heroes are free and run towards the screen. Hal shoves the door off its hinges and scoops up all the hornets in a green bubble. Oliver tends to Dinah while Hal, realizing the same thing that happened to them happened to Carol, goes back for Grandy. Hal confronts Grandy and he orders Sybil to attack, but Sybil has finally had enough. She says she doesn't want to be used to hurt people anymore. Grandy slaps her, and Sybil starts collapsing the building on them. Hal hurries the other kids outside. The school crumbles, burying the old man and the little girl. Oliver asks Hal if he could have saved them, and Hal says that's a question he'll live with for the rest of his life. Hal turns to Carol, tells her he's tired of being proud, that Oliver's example has given him strength. Hal reveals his identity to Carol and apologizing for insisting she settle for plain old Hal Jordan. And Carol says that she was too proud herself. She couldn't admit the man she loved was anything less than a superhero. Inside, she must have known they were the same man. Hal tells her he loves her and sweeps her off her feet. His mask lies in the rain, by a little girl's feet. It seems Sybil made it out after all. The small town lies in danger of being flooded as the huge dam surrounding it breaks down. Will Hal Jordan save them from the peril in plastic? The last month has been bliss for one Hal Jordan and one Carol Ferris as an old love is rekindled and enjoyed. Carol says she's seeing a doctor tomorrow about her legs in the below sea level town of Piper's Dell. Hal offers to accompany her, but she says it's something she must do alone. The next day, Hal visits Ollie at his new apartment. Ollie says Speedy found the place in the slums of the city. They compare musical tastes until a report on the radio warns of the seawall crumbling around Piper's Dell. Hal jumps, as that's where Carol is. Hal races to the scene and sees bombs going off all along the dam. He stops 2 of them manually, but that's too slow, so he creates a giant magnet, hoping they're plastic explosive. Luckily, they're just powder encased in iron, and he rips them all out. But he's made a hole in the wall, though, and that needs fixing. Green Lantern scoops up a mound of dirt with a plow and slams it into the crack, pressurizing it into staying in place until it can be repaired. After all that, Hal needs a rest. While resting, Hal is greeted by the doctor Carol is seeing there, who's also the mayor of Piper's Dell. He takes Hal on a tour, showing him the company town. Smokestacks pipe smog into the atmosphere from the factory where everyone works. They make small plastic brooches called coludas, a combination toy and decoration, and it randomly emits a pleasant scent. Just then the ground shakes. It's the factory press creating more of them. The mayor drags Hal along to a key presenting ceremony. The stage, like everything here, is made of plastic, and breaks easily as Hal mounts it. He is presented with a flimsy plastic key to the flimsy plastic city. His Kaluta sprays more perfume in his face. Hal begins to leave as the mayor tells him that someday, every place in America will be like Piper's Dell. Green Lantern tries to fly away, but finds concentration difficult and falls. The mayor tells a crowd of men in suits to get him. Hal runs down the street, but is hit by briefcases and umbrellas, knocking down a plastic lamppost and eventually falling into a house through a thin plastic wall. With his last bit of mental strength, he commands his ring to fly to Oliver Queen's apartment. The power ring flies unerringly to his target, bouncing off Ollie's wall and landing on a table. He doesn't see it though, and is distracted by a knock at the door. Dinah has dropped by for a date, so it seems that Hal's on his own for the time being. He awakens locked in a chair and is greeted by the supervillain Black Hand. Black Hand created the town of Piper's Dell to practice brainwashing techniques on the people there, saying they're like cattle, give them just enough comfort to satisfy them, and then anything they think threatens them, they attack. It is the logical extension of the company town. Even though people saw Green Lantern save the town earlier, the drugs from Macluda and the power of suggestion from authority has turned public opinion harshly against him. Carol was the bait to lure his enemy into the trap, and now, to demonstrate the power of the brainwashing, he releases Hal and Carol into the town. Hal is far from helpless without his ring, and he takes out all the citizens he has to protect Carol with a minimum of force. Meanwhile, another fight is occurring between Oliver and Dinah. It seems he got rough with a restaurant patron who was eyeing her up. Back home alone, though, he finally finds the ring. He knows Hal wouldn't send the ring unless he was in serious trouble. Ollie finds the lantern in Hal's room and recharges the ring, reciting the oath just to play it safe. And after renting a dinghy, all he can afford, he's on his way to Piper's Dell. Hal and Carol have run out of room at the docks on the edge of town. He heaves a wheelchair at the crowd in a last-ditch effort, when Green Arrow tells him to freeze. Hal holds perfectly still as Ollie shoots an arrow holding the ring right between his outstretched fingers from the rocking boat at just the correct speed to deliver the ring without injury, a shot only Green Arrow could make, and with it, Green Lantern has his ring back. Free from the Kaluta's drug, Hal easily contains all the angry people in boxes and crashes through into Black Hand's plastic lair. Hal melts the plastic of the building into a prison for Black Hand. The next day, Carol says the people of Piper's Dell must have been crazy to surrender their freedom of choice so easily, and Hal replies they were different, just a bit more greedy and a bit less responsible than most people. Ollie points to a sale for plastic Christmas trees and asks, "You really think they were different?" Some will say the following story should not be told. There will be those who argue that such events have no place in an entertainment magazine. Perhaps they are right, but we don't think so, because we've seen these noble creatures, human beings, wrecked, made less than animals, plunged into hells of agonies. We've seen it. We're angry, and this is our protest. Snowbirds don't fly. Three young punks lie in wait in a dark alley as Oliver Queen strolls down the sidewalk. They accost him, demanding his money. Ollie's coming back from a bad date, and he's in no mood for trouble. Or maybe the perfect mood, as he takes his frustrations out by punching out two of the punks. One of the kids crawls to a crossbow and points it at Ollie. He's not afraid. Not until the kid shoots him in the chest. Oliver Queen crawls along the streets searching for help, but a couple pass him by, not wanting to get involved. The payphone is out of order, and even the policeman just tells him to go home and sleep it off. A taxi sees him and turns on its off-duty light, and he staggers into the hospital. The lady at the desk says they're busy and asks him to come back in the morning. "Isn't modern civilization wonderful?" he asks as he falls over onto her desk. After he's been patched up, he asks to see the arrow. He thought it looked familiar. Ollie calls the operator, and she connects him to Hal in Coast City. Hal agrees to come at once, and he charges his ring. Oliver tells Hal the arrow is one of his own. He's left plenty around at crime scenes, but he can't help but worry about Speedy, who he hasn't seen in a month. Distracted by his romance with Dinah, he hasn't had time for anything else. With his arm in a sling, he's asking Hal for backup. In the basement of a flea trap hotel, two heroes come upon a disturbing scene. A young man is pleading for drugs from a pusher, but he is pitiless and kicks the young man away. Hal asks what's wrong, and Ollie tells him he's in withdrawal from heroin. Ollie shoves the pusher, but he hits him in his hurt shoulder. Hal pushes the man against the wall where he goes for an axe, but Hal melts it with his ring. He wraps them all in green energy and flies to the police station. Three young junkies, two from the attack earlier, are hanging out at home in Chinatown. The Asian teen says his father answers to ethnic slurs at work all day, then comes home to groove on his armaments like he's Genghis Khan or something. Him? He's found another escape. The black teen relates, but worse than the words is what's behind their hate-filled eyes. That contempt you feel when someone sees you as less than human, less than equal. Heroin makes his life bearable. They're waiting on their friend who isn't going to return. Instead, Green Lantern and Green Arrow plunge through a hole in the roof, and Hal grabs the two teens' hands and feet. The third teenager asks if Green Arrow plans to lock him up too, and it's Roy Harper, his sidekick Speedy. Oliver says he's not surprised to see him here. He must have been on a case ahead of him, playing undercover agent. The Asian teen offers to take him to the top of the racket. He says he doesn't dig his habit. He wants to see the pushers behind bars. Ollie tells Speedy he looks a little pale, he'd better sit out the fight, and they take off. Ollie has little sympathy for the addicts. He's tempted to pay one of them back for the crossbow. Hal tells him not to be so hard on him, and Ollie says he blames the pushers because they prey on weakness, but his heart doesn't bleed for the junkies. Life is tough for everybody, he says, and if you want to claim humanity, don't crawl into a drugged stupor. They arrive at a private airfield and follow someone who appears to be high. The gangsters are glad business is booming until it's their guns that are exploding thanks to Green Lantern. The Asian teen clocks Hal from behind with a wrench, and the others dogpile the wounded Green Arrow. Rather than kill them, the crooks decide to discredit them by making them snort pure heroin. They then call the police and scram, but not before rewarding the loyalty of their customers. Roy beats the police there and misdirects them, then tries to snap Hal out of his drugged stupor. Hal tries to make the ring work in his condition. Once again, Green Lantern pours willpower into the mysterious green gem, a willpower sickened by the chemicals polluting his blood. A shimmering shape begins to form, a twisted, hideous character of himself. The twilight truth of the drug transformed into immediate, tangible reality by the ring, slavering, hungry, monstrous. With a supreme act of will, Hal rejects the monstrous form of himself and sends the three friends away in one bubble of clear will, one thought he focuses on with all his might: to be a man and not a monster. The boys recover, and it's like the worst hangover they've ever had. They also blew the case, and now they have nothing. Hal doesn't understand how anyone could fall into that lifestyle, but Roy offers a possibility. Say if a young person had someone he respected and admired, but then that person abandoned him to chase his own dreams, he might need a substitute for that friendship, and he might seek it in junk. Oliver says the sob story makes him sick. The heroes resolve to start fresh in the morning. The deals get done in the shadows as a green streak flies overhead, unaware. Ollie comes back inside only to find Speedy shooting heroin into his arm. He's shocked. Speedy asks him, who did he think he was talking about? They say it'll kill me, but they won't say when. Green Arrow backhands Speedy in a rage, yelling that he's a lousy junkie, no better than the rest of the punks. Speedy says go on, hit him if it makes him feel better. Roy asks if he's proven himself yet, that he's stronger than us weaklings. Big man like him doesn't need drugs, he gets high on self-righteousness. Oliver tells him to shut up and get out. He's not interested in excuses, and Roy leaves. After, he wonders if it is his fault. He hasn't been paying attention, that's true. But he taught Roy to be strong, tough, and independent. He shouldn't need attention at his age. Oliver tells himself that he's innocent of blame. He blames the pushers and heads back to the airfield. Meanwhile, at his apartment, the two punks arrive looking for Speedy. They find his works on the floor and decide to use them. Pass up a chance and you'll always be one behind, says the black teen. The Asian teen tries to parcel out the hits from the pure heroin. He ties off and shoots up first to judge the dose. He doesn't need food or girls, just old Mama Spike into the main line. He feels a ton of fire ripping through him. He's so far up, he's nowhere. Nowhere. He falls to the floor. Oh my God! He overdosed! He's dead! The black teen runs off into the night. Hal is mulling things over. Something about Speedy is bothering him. The way he looked while telling his hypothetical story. He charges up and heads out. Arriving at Green Arrow's apartment, Green Lantern finds the boy's corpse and little else. While Hal searches the city for Roy, Oliver searches the hangar for clues. He interrogates a guard and gets the location of the owner's boat. However, he was left behind and instructed to do so should anyone come looking. Hal tries everywhere he can think of, and he gets lucky at the attic in Chinatown. Roy lies behind some garbage cans. Hal offers to get him to a doctor, but he refuses, saying he's going to kick the habit by himself to prove to his high and mighty guardian he's as strong as Ollie is, then laugh in his face. Hal trusts him enough to take him to Dinah's place, but he's far from sure about what he's doing. On the way, Hal asked Roy how he got started. Roy says he was just curious. He'd heard great things, and he had no reason to believe the adults' sermons because so much of their advice turned out to be lies. He's been told that war is fun, that skin color matters, that a man's worth it in his bank account. All crocks. So why believe the drug rap? Hal wishes he could answer, but anything he says would be a crock. Before he goes, he gives Hal the location of the big importer's yacht, and Dinah answers the door. Down at the pier, Green Arrow has found the yacht and is attacked by the guards. Even with a hurt arm, he's a formidable fighter. Fighting through the pain, he flips a guard onto the dock, but he's tripped and knocked out. The young, handsome, and rich Solomon is the boss, and he orders Green Arrow disposed of after the yacht is left. He returns to his party, the who's who of the town. His party cruises a cover for heroin smuggling, something not everyone aboard knows. Oliver is tied to an anchor and pushed into the water. The shock of the cold water wakes him. Thinking fast, he pulls out an acetylene torch arrow and melts through the chain, barely making it to the surface in time to see Green Lantern arrive. He points Hal in the right direction, and he flies at the thug behind a bulletproof dome. A pair of large green gorillas toss the thugs into crates and seal them in. Green Energy fans quick-dry arrows close. Hal says that Speedy sent him here, but it's none of his business, but the kid needs help, bad. Dinah offers safety and sympathy to Roy as he goes through his withdrawal. The night is long, full of a boy's pain and a woman's pity. The next day, Solomon returns to his pharmaceutical company and drops in on his scientist who has an even more potent batch of drugs in the works. It's safe to transport it himself, as no policeman would dare suspect someone who entertains judges and senators. Green Lantern wants to know if he'd bet on that. He says Solomon's had quite a career, wallowing in luxury while his victims suffered and ended up on slabs in the morgue. Well, it's over. His senators will turn on him. His pet judges will sentence him. He'll go to prison and he'll rot. Green Arrow shoots the beaker before the scientist can hit Hal with it, and Solomon tries to jump out the window. Hal grabs him and throws him into some machines. Unimpressed with Solomon's claim of being a boxing champion, Hal throws him into more equipment. Green Arrow says he's hurt bad. Green Lantern says he doesn't pretend to represent justice. Given the pain of his victims, he's not sorry he's hurting. Autumn has come, and the funeral of the Asian teenager. At least they caught his murderers, says Hal. What's one worm in a world full of misery, asks Oliver. Speedy tells him not to despair. He tells Oliver that he beat his habit, by himself. Good boy, Ollie says, but Roy isn't having it. He says he only made it with the help of his friends after Oliver turned his back on him. He socks Ollie in the jaw, and he says he's just sharing a very small piece of the pain he's been going through. The kind of pain thousands of kids are going through every day because an uncaring and unthinking society turned its back on them. Drugs are a symptom, he says, and Oliver and the rest of society attack the symptom, but not the disease. But this symptom's worse than most. It maims, it dims you, it drives you over the edge, and one day ends with your trip to the morgue. Roy leaves, saying that Ollie needs Dinah's help more than him, but he doesn't even know it. He's kinda dumb in a lot of ways. Roy says he's like him a lot. He's dumb enough to think he can help his friends avoid that slab. It's a very large lump of pride which forms in the throat of Oliver Queen, as his boy becomes a man. Green Lantern is charging his ring when an earthquake strikes, and so begins Beware My Power. The quake is a brief one, but it has crumbled a bridge and stranded a young girl near the edge. Alternate Green Lantern Guy Gardner edges out towards her. The bus dislodges, though, and strikes him, but Green Lantern saves them both. Guy will be in traction for at least 6 months, so the Guardians tell Hal a new alternate has been selected in case anything happens to him. To be chosen for the Corps, one must be both honest and fearless. Who is this new choice? At that moment, in the ghetto, 2 policemen are hassling some youths playing dominoes on the sidewalk. John Stewart gives the cop a piece of his mind, asking if the boys really need a permit to play there. The cop offers to give him trouble, but John isn't about to run from it, and he doubts this is the kind of man to give it, even with his nightstick. He says they've got no respect, and the other cop tells him, Fred, respect has to be earned. The way you acted, You didn't earn a nickel's worth. Hal's a bit put off by this encounter. Sure, John is brave and certainly honest, but he has a chip on his shoulder Hal doesn't like. In a coffee shop, Hal has explained the situation to John. Since jobs aren't exactly plentiful for black architects, John accepts, even saying maybe he should call him Black Lantern. Of course, it would be decades before the Black Lanterns became a thing, and then they would be zombies. Hal teaches him the oath and how the rings and batteries work. John finds the oath a bit corny, except the part about beware my power. Hal rings him up a uniform, and John gets rid of the mask, saying this black man lets it all hang out. His identity has always been public. A few hours of flying practice, and John is a pro. He says it's much easier than getting home to his pad at night past the muggers. They fly by the airport. A crowd of protesters are endangered as an oil truck skids out of control. Hal cages the people to move them to safety while John stops the truck from hitting the plane, just happening to puncture the oil tanker and splash the arriving racist senator with oil. John asks him if he hasn't seen him picking cotton someplace. Hal admonishes him for being irresponsible, and John lets him have it, saying that man is trying to climb to the White House on the backs of his people. Hal says that nobody appointed him judge, and as a lesson assigned John to protect the senator during his visit. An hour later, the senator spews old-fashioned hate speech at a stadium which both Green Lanterns are disgusted to have to listen to. Suddenly, a black man jumps from the crowd and fires a gun at the senator. Hal leaps into action, but John says he's leaving. Hal nabs the shooter, who didn't use his gun to try and stop him, oddly enough, planning to discipline John later. Meanwhile, John moves a cop out of the way of another shooter with a machine gun in the parking lot. He takes care of the man and his gun until Hal arrives. Hal gets angry with him, thinking he betrayed his duty, but John tells him he didn't buy the first shooter because he saw him at the airport earlier, along with the other shooter. He tells Hal to examine the gun the first shooter used. The gun is filled with blanks. It was an attempt to frame black people for acts of violence to justify the senator's angry rhetoric. Hal is certain the senator's colleagues will reprimand him, and who knows, in 1976, that might even have been true. Hal apologizes to John for misjudging him because he didn't like his style. John says style isn't important, any more than color. There was a time when Oliver Queen was the wonder boy of Star City, the young head of a mammoth corporate empire. Oliver Queen, playboy, philanthropist of the public, but secretly Green Arrow, dynamic archer of the Justice League of America. But the business world is cruel to the young, the naive, cruel to the arrogant corporation chairman who lost his quickly gained fortune to those who would pervert the values for which Oliver Queen hoped to use his material possessions. Bent but not broken, Green Arrow learned what it was to be a poor man. Who are you, green-clad bowman? The flamboyant crime fighter? The latter-day Robin Hood? Or the broken businessman, once admired and envied, now scraping along on what little is left? Who are you, you who call yourself Green Arrow? What does a man do when his world is torn down around him, when he falls to the same injustices from which he has sought to protect others? What do you do, Oliver Queen, as you walk among Star City's million souls and ask, what can one man do? Finding the mail full of the problems of the world, Oliver Queen responds by ego-tripping around town, as he calls it, as the Green Arrow. Some see him as the show-off he is, while others see him as a force for justice. Perhaps he is both. Meanwhile, in an office uptown, the mayor refuses to run again, and his party needs a new candidate. The name Oliver Queen is brought up as someone truly incorruptible with a flawless public image. Oliver saves a dog in a rail yard and heads home, blaming the conditions of his neighborhood that left that kid with nowhere to play but the rail yard. Sometimes he thinks costume characters aren't good for much besides bug-eyed monsters and alien invasions. When he had his fortune, he thought he could do something as Oliver Queen. Just then, he gets the call asking him to run for mayor. He calls Dinah first, then Bruce Wayne, who was a senator once, then Hal, whose brother is the DA, and finally Clark Kent, the news anchor for WGBS. None of them think it's a good idea, least of all for his secret identity. It's way harder a job than the one he's got now. Ollie thinks he's just a clown in a green circus costume, because he once thought he could do some good. He laughs at the idea of being mayor. He needs to get across town to apologize to Dinah, and he tries out his new rocket pack, built when he could afford it. A rocket arrow guides his flight as the bow attaches to the quiver and jets extend from the sides. It isn't working quite right, so he bails out with a parachute and lands on the street. He hears a commotion nearby and walks straight into a full-blown riot. Minorities of all races clash with the police in a directionless, angry mob. In the face of this anger, this discord, what can one man do? Oliver is hit in the head with a bottle and a young boy comes to apologize. He didn't know it was him. As he apologizes, he is shot in the back by an unknown assailant. Any man would be stunned facing something so horribly unexpected, as is this hero among men stunned, acting by instinct before he's fully realized what has happened, carrying the young boy to an ambulance, one of many on the periphery waiting. And what has happened begins to dawn in his mind. As words from long ago and far away come to Green Arrow's mind. If people bring so much courage to this world that the world has to kill them to break them, so of course it kills them. The world breaks everyone, and afterward many are strong in the broken places, but those that will not break, it kills. It kills the very good, and the very gentle, and the very brave, impartially. Epilogue. What can one man do? Oliver finally makes to Dinah's and tells her what has happened. 5 people died and 21 were hospitalized in the riot, and Oliver has decided to run for mayor. There are some things he has to do, and this is one of them. Sleep well, Oliver Queen. You may not do so again for a long, long time. End of part 2.